Welcome to the Word for 2021. Today we're in Genesis chapter 32. Where do you find strength in the midst of trouble? That's what we'll learn today. Jacob has heard that Esau, his brother, is coming to meet him, but he's coming with 400 men. So it says in verse 7 that he was greatly distressed and troubled. He didn't know what was going to happen next. His knees were shaking. So what does he do? In verse 9, he prays. He asked God for help, but there's three parts to his prayer that we need to take note of. First, he started with humility. He said, God, I am unworthy. Everything I have, it's come from you. You've supplied it all. But now, help save me. Save me from my brother Esau. I'm afraid. And so the third part of his prayer was then he held on to faith. He said, but God, you told me that this is what you are going to do for me. So he started with humility. Then he asked for help, but he held on to faith. He believed that God was going to be faithful to his word. With that, there are two important aspects to put into practice when we need strength in the midst of trouble. The first is to admit that we don't have enough. We don't have enough intellect. We don't have enough power. We don't have enough resources. Within ourselves, we are not enough to meet the challenges that we're going to face. And the second is to believe in God's power. Let me go back to that first aspect, to admit. God is drawn to weakness. God is drawn to brokenness. Everywhere in the Old Testament and the New, when people prayed and things happened, it's because they started at that place where we are in need, God, and you are our only hope. In fact, when Jesus spoke the Sermon on the Mount in Mark chapter 5, what did he start with? He started with, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst. And blessed are those who are persecuted. All of those are places of weakness, of brokenness. But that's where God works best. When we come to him broken, God brings healing. When we come to a place of powerlessness, then God's power flows into our life because we're relying upon him. I love what Vance Havner once said. God uses broken things. Think of it this way. He said, broken soil brings about a crop. Broken clouds bring rain. Broken grain brings bread. Broken bread brings strength. And just like that alabaster jar that lady brought, it was not usable until it was broken open. But then when that alabaster box of perfume was broken, the atmosphere was changed. Vance Havner said, in the same way, we are just on display until we are broken. But once God breaks us, and then what is inside of us, which is him, flows out, then everything changes. So the first aspect, if you're going to find strength in the midst of trouble, is to admit that you're in need of God's presence and power. And then the second is to believe in God's power and his ability. I love the law of the pendulum. The law of the pendulum says this, that a pendulum can never return to a point higher than the point from which it was released. That's because of friction and of gravity. It always has an arc to it, but that arc will continue to slow down until it comes to that place of rest or a state of equilibrium. So when a pendulum starts, it starts at one point and it goes to the opposite direction, but when it comes back, it never goes to the same point. It always is a little bit less. On YouTube, I was watching a professor at college talk about this with his class, and he used a bowling ball, of all things. He had it suspended to the ceiling, and he stood up against a wall. His back was against the wall, and he had that bowling ball right up against his chin and on his nose. And then he let it go, and that bowling ball went out, and then when it came back, all of his class were gasping and they couldn't believe what they were seeing, but that bowling ball came just short of hitting his nose and his chin. And everyone clapped and cheered. And then it went all the way down to that state of equilibrium. And then he asked the class, do you believe in the law of equilibrium? And they all said, yes, we do. Then he said, I need a volunteer. Well, don't you know that one student in the class said, I volunteer. And so that student put his back against the wall, put the bowling ball against his chin, and then when it was let go and released, it went out. And when it came back in, that student disappeared. He got out of there as quick as he could. Did he really believe in the law of equilibrium? Not really. It's not until we're faced with trouble that we're going to know if what we believe is really real. Theory is proved right because of fire, and faith is forged in fire or in trouble. In this chapter, Jacob believed that God would help him. He came humbly. He asked for help, but he held on to what God had said to him earlier. So he admitted his need, but then he believed in God's power, and God came through. God will come through for you and me too. What we need to do is admit that we need God and then believe in his power and his ability. Thank you for joining the Word for 2021.